Let's now discuss the events that would happen inside of the amphitheater and how they are counterbalanced by the construction and the decorative elements on the exterior of the amphitheater. So here we are standing on the stage, or the wood paneled floor of the amphitheater, and it was covered by a thick layer of sand. The sand was called arena. In fact, that's where we get the name arena. Arena, these large circular areas where we hold events. Arena comes from the sand that was layered on top of the wood planked floors, because the sand, arena, was used to soak up blood. Blood? In an amphitheater? Why? You know, I know. Gladiators. So let's talk about those gladiator events. First, gladiators are slaves. They are slaves who are kept and fed and trained to kill. Here, this is not an actual representation of the slaves. These are this is a romanticized painting of it, but I like to give it to you as just kind of a visual anchor as we talk about gladiators. So as I said, gladiators were slaves who were kept, fed, and trained to fight and to kill for entertainment. A gladiator fight would often be gladiator versus gladiator, and if there was a challenge or a question to the mercy of another fighter, then the audience would decide the fate of that gladiator. Like here, you can see one of the ways that you would do that is if you wanted them to kill the other person, thumbs down. If you wanted them to live, thumbs up, they fought so good, let them live another day. So gladiator versus gladiator was a common combat that would happen. Gladiators would often have a specialty weapon. One of the most effective was a sword and a fishing net. Now I know what you're thinking. That sounds super lame. A fishing net? No. Think about it. You could cast out a net, entangle your opponent, bring them on in, and then stab them on through. So gladiator versus gladiator often would happen. There would also be events, gladiator versus animal, beast. Different large ferocious creatures from all over the empire would be carted and then brought to the amphitheater. And then you would be like, ooh, let's see a gladiator versus a lion or a tiger. Or maybe just beast on beast. Let's get a bear from Germany and put it against a tiger or a lion or an elephant. And it would be for entertainment. It feeds into that bloodlust of being a Roman. Remember, we have to battle our identity of requiring peace and prosperity as farmers and the stability that it brings and that it needs, with chaos and destruction and conquering and looting, control over others. And so here in the amphitheater, we have this microcosm of that with these bloodthirsty events of the gladiators. Oftentimes it would be gladiator versus gladiator, and then boom, stage door opens and here comes the lion. One of the more horrific events that would happen sometimes is they would just have creatures brought from all over the empire, and they'd be running around the inside of the amphitheater, and then there would be archers stationed around the wall, and they would just pluck them off one at a time with their bows and arrows. It's horrific. Now, you might be thinking, I would never want to be a gladiator. That sounds awful. But many people wanted to be gladiators and would volunteer to become slave as gladiators, because if you survived, you could, and there were many cases of this, if you survived, you could build up a fan base, a following, you could become famous, you could earn enough money to buy your own freedom and retire off into, a nice little villa in the Tuscan hillsides. Maybe you've lost an arm, though, or an eyeball, or you have a limp, but hey, you're alive and you had your fame and your fortune. Remember that I mentioned gladiators when we were talking about Greece. Remember the apoxymenos, the scraper. So gladiators would also clean themselves with perfumed oils and then scrape off that dirt and blood and grime and save it. I know, it's disgusting, I know. They would save it in jars and sell that, and people would buy them and then put them all over their bodies because they saw it as like an aphrodisiac or a way of increasing their fertility or their virility. So we could talk more about it. If you want to know more about gladiators, let me know. But I mention all of this because I want you to get the concept of the chaos and destruction that would occur inside of these amphitheaters, and then how they are counterbalanced by the logic and reason of the exterior. So here we are looking at the exterior of the Colosseum, and we see 3 levels of arcades. Arcade, remember arcade meaning row of arches? I will tell you this, if you're thinking of like a video arcade and you're like, what? Video arcade, where does that come from? Email me, we can talk more about it. But the visual language is an arcade is a row of arches. So we see 3 levels of arches. And then this upper portion here, this is where those wood poles would have been installed for the retractable roof. Now, the rows of arches between each arch in the spandrel, we can see columns. What type of columns do we see? Oh, Miss Cortez, you put it right there. Corinthian, Ionic, Tuscan. Not that. I mean, are they freestanding or engaged columns? They're engaged columns. So they are lining the spandrels, but the hard work is being done by the rounded arch. These are decorative elements. They're decorative elements not serving much purpose, but they do symbolize balance and order and reason. Because if you look at them, that ground level columns are what we would call Tuscan. Remember we learned about them from the Etruscans? It makes sense that the Romans would be using Tuscan. They took Etruscan territory. The second level are Ionic columns, those volutes. The third level, Corinthian. Now, what I want you to think about is the visual symbolism of each of these columns. Corinthian columns, very decorative. They have these leaves that kind of bushel and tumble out. They don't seem like they do a lot of hard work. Ionic columns, they're decorative, but they also have this nice flat base. They seem like they can handle some weight. And then there's Tuscan, which is just no fun stuff business, straight up and down. I'm not here to be ornamental. I'm here to hold up something. Using this concept of these visual elements, of these engaged columns, think about where their placement on these levels. The Tuscan columns at the base, the Corinthian at the top. The Corinthian, they don't have a lot of weight they have to hold up. They can be big and graceful and celebratory. The next level, Ionic, they have to hold a little bit more weight. And so they can be decorative, but they also visually look like they can handle the weight of the Corinthian columns and the post above them. The Tuscan, it's the ground floor. It needs to be firm. It's a strong foundation. It's holding up these massive levels of construction. So visually, we see it relating to their weight or what they can hold. Not technically, not actual weight, but the visual weight of Corinthian, Ionic, Tuscan, right? So what we see here is a visual display of logic, of order, taking the chaos inside and applying logic and order on the outside. This is so typical of the Romans, isn't it? You counterbalance the chaos that occurs inside with the exterior in the visual expressions of the ration of weight or sturdiness, with the Tuscan being the most capable of carrying the heavy load. Now, I know your next question. Your next question is probably, but what about this up here, Miss Cortez? What's that? It's your next vocabulary term. These are not columns. These are pilasters. Pilasters are flat, engaged, regular or rectangular piers. So a pier or a pillar is a square post, and when they are engaged or attached, they are then called pilasters. So we have pilasters, and then they are topped by Corinthian capitals. See that? And then the wood posts would be between those, resting on these ledges here. So we have engaged columns, rounded arches, pilasters. They go from Tuscan, Ionic, Corinthian, Corinthian. I'm just going to say it one more time. The logic and reason of the exterior is counterbalancing the chaos that happens inside. When we are standing in one of the corridors, here we are on the second level corridor. This is our view as it is today, but we need to add a lot of information that is now missing. You see these pock marks here? Those are from the looting of the veneer. Remember that the Colosseum has a core of concrete, and then these thin sheets of marble and travertine were placed on top. They were clamped to the concrete interior with these iron bars or staples. And so what we're looking at are the exposed concrete because the marble has been ripped out, and then those iron clamps were also removed because, of course, why wouldn't you? I need some iron. Take that, chop it up, melt it down. Now I got some more iron. So the exterior pockmarks are just another, not vandalism, but another symptom of the fall of the empire and the looting of the Colosseum. So imagine the sides of the walls all to have been covered with polished, decorative, spiral patterns of marble and travertine stone. And then the the ceilings would have been covered in these brightly tiled mosaics. And they would have gone the length up and around the Colosseum. So where are they now? Well, they've been scraped off and used for other things. I know. What we're looking at specifically in this is a barrel vault. A barrel vault, this level here, you see that barrel vault? I know it's pixelated. That's where we're standing. And you already know about barrel vaults. We talked about them in the Sanctuary of Fortuna Primigena in the Roman Republic period. But just to remind you, the vocab terms: a vault, an arch structure forming a ceiling or a roof over an enclosed space. Specifically, these are barrel vaults because they are rounded arches that kind of resemble a barrel. And they were made of concrete. And how concrete is much more efficient than stone cut. Okay. You got it all? Right? So that's what we're appreciating here in the second level, or this second level that wraps all the way around the Colosseum. But what about the first level, the ground floor? Here we are looking at the ground level. So these archways are those exterior arches that open out to the outside, and then over to our left are the staircases that go into the seating. So we're standing here on the ground floor, and what we're looking at above, which would have been covered in beautiful mosaic patterns, is a groin vault. It's different from the barrel vault just above it. Do you see the difference? Barrel vault, this is a groin vault. Now I'm giving you a diagram here to help illustrate what kind of construction we're seeing here. So we have a barrel vault that continues all the way around the Colosseum, right? But it's intersected by these archways that come from the exterior and go interior. And what they do is they create this X pattern. Here, this is a diagram of a groin vault. So you have two barrel vaults, and to make a groin vault, you take one barrel vault and you cross it parallel with a second barrel vault. You see that? Two barrel vaults cross together, make a groin vault. There's our barrel vault, and then intersecting with these side barrel vaults. It's called a groin vault because the shape that it creates between those two intersecting barrel vaults kind of looks like legs and a groin. Does that make sense? There's your two legs and there's your groin. So we have groin vaults down on the ground level. Now a smart student in class would think to themselves, why? Why don't you just use barrel vaults? We already know that rounded arches are great. Why are you messing with this? Well, it's all about efficiency. And a groin vault is much more efficient at forcing the weight of gravity down and away from the center of an arch. A barrel vault, we already know. Barrel vaults directed to the walls. However, a groin vault has a more focused direction. It not only focuses it down to the walls, but you can pinpoint it to specific corners of those walls. So rather than the entire wall bearing the weight of the arch and whatever is above it, with a groin vault, you can direct it to smaller, more specific points, therefore opening up portions of the wall with more archways. A groin vault is more efficient at directing the weight of gravity and the building to specific points. This comes in handy when you're thinking of a lower level because it's carrying the weight of all the levels above it. So the groin vaults, which are located on the ground level, are more efficient at carrying or bearing the weight of the barrel vaults on the second floor, and then the open walls or open ceiling of the third floor and those pilasters on the fourth exterior shell. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. If I was in class with you, I'd be able to read your faces and be like, does it make sense? Yes? No? And then you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. So let me know if it doesn't quite make sense, because I want us to understand the concept of barrel vaults, groin vaults, because they're going to continue with us throughout the rest of the semester. So barrel vaults, great, efficient, direct the weight better than posts and lintels, but groin vaults are even better because they direct the weight to very specific points, allowing for portions of the wall to open up. Efficiency. And thinking again about that visual efficiency of the Tuscan column to Ionic to Corinthian, it translates with the use of the barrel vault and then the more sturdy, strong, stable groin vault with the Tuscan columns. So counterbalancing the chaos that happens inside of the Colosseum, the logic and order and reason of the exterior, It's maintaining the identity, the difficult identity of being a Roman. Before we leave the Colosseum, I will tell you of one tragic event that happened. What, Miss Cortez? In 2015, two California female college students snuck away from their tour group on a Saturday, and they scratched their initials into one of the walls of the Colosseum. Yes. They were only found out. There they right there. They were only found out when a guard at the Colosseum noticed them taking a selfie with their initials. Now, what was the punishment? The punishment was a heavy fine. They had to pay 20,000 euros each for vandalism. And I showed you the initials right there, and you see all these other initials around it. Well, hey, we're humans and we all like to tag things up and show that we were there. When you go to these monuments, these ancient monuments, you're going to see lots of these scrawls of initials and words. And some of these date back hundreds and hundreds of years. Because as human beings, we always like to say, like, I was here, I did this, we were here together. And you scratch your name. So these are older vandalism to the walls of the Colosseum. And they just added into it. Which, I don't know, is that less severe or not? Also, this wall that the two women had carved their initials into, it was one of the previous restored walls from like 100 years ago. So it's not like original wall, but it's still a wall in the Colosseum. So again, does that make it less important or less severe? Because it's like, it's not an actual wall from the Colosseum. It's a restored wall. It's only 100 years old. Or is it just the principle of don't do that? How about you just don't put your initials on a wall in the Colosseum? Done. Okay, let's move on.